The Secret of Solomon's Wealth. Episode 14. Solomon insisted on detailed contracts. Always read the fine print. A few nights ago, I saw an advertisement for exercise equipment on television. As I watched, I grew more and more excited. The merchandise was being offered for a very reasonable price. Then, I looked a second time. The price splashed across the screen was not really the price of the equipment, it was the amount of each monthly installment. At first I was disappointed. Then, I realized that almost every transaction in business is just like this. It is so important to read every detail of a contract and make certain you understand it clearly. Solomon, the richest man who ever lived, understood the importance of covenant and making a precise and well-understood agreement. We read in 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 12 that he and Hiram, the king of Tyre, made a league together. Here are 5 facts that are keys to Solomon's success with contracts. 1. Solomon was detailed in his expectations. Now therefore command thou that they hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon, he says in 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 6. 2. Solomon was detailed in who he would hire. Unto thee will I give hire for thy servants according to all that thou shalt appoint, he says in 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 6. 3. Solomon told Hiram in detail what kind of compensation he could expect. 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 11 says, And Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 measures of wheat for food to his household, and 20 measures of pure oil. 4. Solomon was detailed about the payment schedule. Thus gave Solomon to Hiram year by year, he says in 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 11. 5. His contracts were always a win-win situation for all parties involved. Hiram was also pleased by the contract. In 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 9, he says, And thou shalt accomplish my desire, in giving food for my household. Ronald Reagan, the former president known as the Great Communicator, irritated foreign dignitaries with his statement, Trust, but verify. Nevertheless, this policy protected the United States repeatedly. Youth trust. The wise test. You can trust me, is a common statement in many circles. Solomon and experienced men like him know better. Words can be misinterpreted, forgotten, or conveniently ignored. Contracts have an important place in our world today. Here are 4 warnings to consider before signing a contract. 1. Always hire an independent, competent lawyer to analyze the details of every contract. Having a professional on your side is vital. He or she can often anticipate a problem that you could not possibly imagine. One of the finest lawyers I have ever known, Dennis Brewer, was reviewing a contract with me one day. Though I had examined that contract from every conceivable angle, he saw a potential problem that had never even crossed my mind. His many years of experience reminded him of a situation that had come up. He helped me avoid a possible trap that could have resulted in great pain. Robert S. McNamara is considered by many to have been one of the most brilliant men ever in government. At one time, he was the vice president in charge of the Ford Division and later would become the Secretary of Defense under the Kennedy administration. On page 42 of his book, Straight Talk, Lee Iacocca wrote, McNamara was also one of the smartest men I've ever met, with a phenomenal IQ and a steel-trap mind. He was a mental giant. With his amazing capacity to absorb facts, he also retained everything he learned. But McNamara would more than want your facts, he also knew the hypothetical ones. When you talked with him, you realized that he'd already played out of his head the relevant details for every conceivable option and scenario. He taught me never to make a major decision without having a choice of at least vanilla or chocolate. And if more than $100 million was at stake, it was a good idea to have strawberry too. 2. Consider every conceivable consequence of a contract. 2 years ago, I sat down in a Christian television studio to share some songs and participate in a telethon. I was brought a contract to sign and it seemed a little strange to me. The contract stated that they would have the right to re-air and play anything I said or did the entire evening anytime, anywhere, and under any circumstance. I refused. I will never sign a contract giving someone the unlimited right to use my statements supporting someone I've never met. Details matter greatly. 3. Never agree to anything that someone is unwilling to write down in a contract. You see, the force of a personality or the atmosphere created to romance us can often deceive us into ignoring the true facts. I have been talked into things I later regretted. Then, I remembered that I was being pressured by someone's aggressiveness and even influenced by their weapon of hospitality. 4. Beware of the weapon of hospitality. Recently, I read a fascinating story by a successful American businessman. He flew overseas to complete a business transaction and was to remain there for 5 days. When he arrived, he was whisked into a whirlwind tour of the country. He hardly slept. He kept asking to see the contracts, which were the reason he had taken the trip in the first place. They murmured that first they wanted to show their hospitality. Moments before he was to leave for the airport, the contracts were brought out. He stated that his mind was so distracted and fragmented, his body so weary, that he hardly knew what he was doing. That's when he realized their entire scheme was to break his focus, wear him down, and force him to make a last-minute decision. When he refused, they were indignant and angry. He insisted on bringing the contracts back to the States where they would be carefully reviewed. Robert McNamara, the legendary vice president of Ford Division, taught Lee Iacocca to write down everything in detail, away from the torrent of words and the influence of a persuasive personality. Go home tonight and put your great idea on paper. If you can't do that, then you haven't really thought it out. Lee Iacocca commented, "It was a valuable lesson, and I've followed his lead ever since. Whenever one of my people has an idea, I ask him to lay it out in writing. I don't want anyone to sell me on a plan just by the melodiousness of his voice or force of his personality. You really can't afford that." In his book, Straight Talk, he continues, "As I'd learned from McNamara, the discipline of writing something down is the first step toward making it happen. In conversation, you can get away with all kinds of vagueness and nonsense, often without even realizing it. But there's something about putting your thoughts on paper that forces you to get down to specifics. It's harder to deceive yourself, or anyone else. Always insist on written and detailed contracts when dealing with matters of importance. This is one of the golden secrets that helps Solomon become the richest man who ever lived." If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thank you.